If you haven't already watched part 1, I highly suggest you watch that before watching this video, as it explains what led up to the events of Cape Town. Click the link here to watch it, and then come back here. Both sides had been accusing each other of cheating throughout the series, and the rumours were rife. Allegedly, players had witnessed the opposition tampering, while South African team management had apparently tipped off Supersport to watch the Australians' handling of the ball. In the third innings of the match, Markram and AB were crushing the Aussies, who were beginning to slip behind the match. Desperate to win, the Aussies needed something to change. They had to put their foot down. That's when the infamous lunch break took place. Let's set the scene. Aussies under pressure, behind in the game, and the bowlers are withering. According to Tim Payne, the dressing room in Cape Town is split into different sections due to the shower and toilet block, meaning players are separated between each room, while the coaches also have their own space. Payne states that something can happen in one room, and the people in the other two would have no idea. Now, something that is notable is that the Australian dressing room setup is often designated by player roles. For example, the Australian bowlers often sit together.
Where's your big fast bowler mate? Where's he gone? You don't sit together, you two?
He's just there. That's his spot just there.
Go.
As do the opening batsmen.
My spot's pretty small compared to Davies, so maybe next time we'll be able to get a bit bigger spot.
And presumably the middle order batsmen. This means that it is not inconceivable that while the Australian top 6 was in one half of the room, the lower order, including keeper Tim Payne, and the pace bowlers were in the other half. This is merely speculative, but it would explain if some of the team were unaware of the cheating, as they say. To this day, we still do not know what specifically occurred in the dressing room, and we might not know for some time. The little we know is that David Warner and Cameron Bancroft created a plan in which the young opening batsman would carry out tampering with the ball. Warner asked Bancroft to do it as the cameras were on him too much. This has been confirmed by Bancroft. Steve Smith knew that the tampering was going to happen, but chose not to interfere. The level of knowledge he had about the plot is disputed. Cameron Bancroft then went onto the field and used sandpaper to tamper with the state of the ball. The Supersport cameras caught him as the producers suspected the Aussies to be cheating due to tape on David Warner's hands. They followed the ball for the whole innings after that, which is when he was caught red-handed. He then tried to hide the paper in his pants, and he then lied to the umpires about what had happened before he and Smith both admitted to it during the press conference. Not that they had any other option. The bowlers, Payne, Lehmann, and the reserve players' knowledge of the incident are all up for debate. The incident is one of a kind in that it's the first ball tampering incident in which the bowlers didn't know what was going on. And after hearing what Tim Payne said prior about the nature of the dressing rooms, yes, I suppose they could have not known about it. Cummins has stated that he found out when it came on the big screen and had a sick feeling in his stomach. Likewise, Hazelwood and Stark claimed that they also did not know. What puts some question marks on the bowlers was Cam Bancroft's interview in late 2021, in which he said it was self-explanatory on whether the bowlers knew about the incident. This seems to suggest that the bowling attack did have an inkling about what had happened. The bowlers released a statement denying this, commenting that even the umpires couldn't tell that the ball was damaged. Without evidence, it's impossible to lay blame on the Aussie bowlers. But another interesting thing to note was that at the time, Smith claimed that the leadership group was alleged to have known about the plot, but that angle fell away over time. Who was in the leadership group? That's up for debate, but players such as Stark and Hazelwood had been in the Australian team for a long time leading into the incident. Lehmann, on the other hand, is a lot more complicated. The footage appears to show Lehmann communicating with Hanscom on the bench, who then races on and has a word to Bancroft. It looks awfully suspicious, but it's impossible to confirm what the nature of the conversation was. It could have merely been Lehmann wanting to get answers out of Bancroft about what was occurring. Lehmann stood down as coach following Warner, Bancroft and Smith's teary press conferences when they arrived back in Australia. The press conference following the scandal was the final nail in the Australian team's coffin. After being sprung by the Supersport cameras, Australia had to take ownership of what had happened, tell 100% of the truth, and attempt to salvage something from this already terrible situation. You can imagine how all of the players felt in that change room after the day's play. For so long, Australia has placed itself as the shining light in Test cricket. The old motto of playing hard but fair, that we've heard time and time again, is key to the Australian cricket experience. The Aussies were always the first ones to call out other teams for bending the rules, especially Smith and Warner. And now for the first time ever, the Australian team had to admit their faults. And with just 5 words, Smith revealed everything you needed to know about the press conference and how it was going to go down.
Stephen, Cameron, do you want to explain to us what we saw on the television cameras out there today and what's happened since?
You want to explain?
The Test captain of Australia, throwing his young opening batsman to the wolves. Instead of taking accountability for what occurred, Smith deferred to his junior to explain what had happened. A massive failure of leadership and captaincy. Smith simply had to open the press conference by explaining all and being absolutely transparent about what had happened. However, instead, he elected to let Cameron Bancroft be the one to take the fall for what had happened. That was the first mistake.
So I've just had discussions with the match officials, and I've been charged with attempting to change the condition of the ball, and on myself, I saw an opportunity to potentially use some tape, get some granules from the rough patches on the wicket, and tried to change the ball condition.
This was quickly followed by the facade clearly made by the Australian team management to lie about the true nature of the cheating. Bancroft remarks that it was tape, not sandpaper. We now know that this was not the case. A journalist in the room picked up on it immediately, asking,
It was tape, was it?
He clearly had some suspicions. Tape and granules from the pitch would insinuate that it was not the premeditated act that the cheating clearly was, and instead it was merely a spur-of-the-moment decision. Similar to that of Faf du Plessis' Mintgate or Shaheen Afridi biting the ball, this would mean that it was less of a plan than what it was in reality. Lying about this only buried Australia deeper. Over the entire press conference, Smith continually throws out buzzwords such as mistake, embarrassed, while promising that it will never happen again under his leadership.
That's a mistake on our behalf again. Poor choice, and hopefully we'll learn something from it. I'm embarrassed. I know the boys in the shed are embarrassed as well. It's a poor reflection on everyone in that dressing room.
He is already appealing for the media to move on from the incident, and is already looking for a way to find redemption for an act that occurred hours before. Moving on was even mentioned by Smith.
I've made it clear. We're regrettable, and we'll move on from this, and it won't happen again. I can promise you that under my leadership. I can promise you it won't happen again. Certainly won't happen again under my leadership, I can promise you.
How does one move on so quickly? The Australian cricket team has cheated, but nah, come on guys, let's just move past this already. The conference was already leaving more questions than answers.
I'm not proud of what's happened at all.
Last one? The media manager interjects as soon as Bancroft finishes his sentence. The conference has only gone for 8 excruciating minutes, and the Australian management is already looking to end it. This was not the correct move. The dirty laundry had to be aired, and the media had to have their fun for a full conference, rather than the paltry 10 minutes they ultimately received. Maybe it had been spurred on by the previous question, which asked if Bancroft had been coerced by the team leadership to do the act.
Cameron, were you asked to do this by the leadership group or senior players and took it on reluctantly in a way that it was something that you felt you should do for the team? Do you feel like you were coerced, pressured into? There's a suggestion that younger members of the team are often asked to do this kind of thing.
Or maybe she just sensed that the press conference was going downhill rapidly. Who knows? There was time for one final question, and the one that was on everyone's lips. Would Steve Smith consider stepping down?
No, I won't be considering stepping down. I still think I'm the right person for the job, but I take responsibility as the captain. I need to take control of the ship, but it's something that I can hope learn from and come back strong from. We'll move past this. It's a big error in judgment, but we'll learn from it and move past it.
Smith was already planning his next step as captain. Winning this series was still in the forefront of his mind. He already wanted to move past it. Cricket was still the most important factor for him. Australian cricket was at rock bottom, but we need to move on from it. After all, there's a big day of cricket ahead tomorrow, right? What Steve Smith failed to understand was the severity of the incident, and as his head hit the pillow, little did he know the disaster that awaited in the morning. The following day was arguably the lowest point in Australian cricket history, aside from the tragic passing of Philip Hughes. You already know this part of the story, so I'll make it as quick as possible. The following day, Steve Smith and David Warner were removed as captain and vice-captain respectively, with Tim Paine given the captaincy for the remainder of the test match. The Aussie media reaction was heavy. Australian audiences' relationship to cricket is fascinating. From November until mid-January, cricket is all that's on everyone's lips. Leading into the first test of a summer, people argue in pubs about who should bat six, while the Sheffield Shield has its opening rounds. At the time, people watched the test matches on the famous Channel 9 coverage, and then switched over to Channel 10 for a couple of Big Bash games in the evening. But then once January ends, the cricket essentially ends. Australia is cricket mad, but only for a few months of the year, and then it is back to the AFL and NRL. As a result, the majority of Australian mainstream sports audiences don't really engage with Australia's overseas tours unless it's maybe an Ashes series in England. The games in the subcontinent and South Africa are on pay TV and don't receive the media attention that they do when the matches are in Australia, given that the games are often played in the middle of the night. In fact, I would go as far to say that a large percentage of Australian sporting fans didn't even know what the overall series score was in South Africa. But suddenly, everyone was across what was happening with the team. It was the leading story on newspapers, television, and even our noble Prime Minister of the time, Malcolm Turnbull, was giving his 2 cents.
It seemed completely beyond belief that the Australian cricket team had been involved in cheating. And cricket is synonymous with fair play.
Appreciate it, Malcolm. The media storm was something to behold, and the Australian team would have been incredibly worn down by what had occurred. Australia ended up getting destroyed in the third test. Ironically, Bancroft and Warner's partnership was the best of the last innings, but a classic Aussie collapse saw the series lost. But to be honest, the result of the series didn't matter. Nothing that had happened in the game mattered, because the team had already lost. They were broken. David Warner became a recluse. He allegedly left the team's WhatsApp group and was then spotted drinking alone at a bar inside the Australian hotel. In the coming days, the ICC handed down the punishments to Smith, Warner and Bancroft. In classic ICC fashion, the punishments were a bit of a joke. Smith and Warner were suspended for the following test, while Bancroft was free to play the next game. Given the severity of what had occurred, it was a bit ridiculous. Cricket Australia knew that further punishment was needed to attend to the media storm, and as a result, Smith and Warner were banned for 12 months each, while Cam Bancroft was suspended for 8 months. In addition, Smith was banned from leadership for a further year after his ban, while Warner was banned for life. All 3 of them flew home from South Africa. Each one marched through the airports like it was a prisoner exchange. As you can see, it's pretty ugly stuff. The team for the final test was symbolic of what had occurred. Matt Renshaw joined the team in South Africa after being dropped before the Ashes for Bancroft, when he really should have been allowed to keep his spot. Joe Burns also joined the team after playing in the infamous Hobart Test. Chad Sayers was named after being 12th man for so long, and Glenn Maxwell even joined the squad. However, he didn't play. On paper, you could see just how big a mismatch this test match was. Tim Paine in particular did his best during the match, but it was no help. Australia got pumped, and South Africa won the series 3-1. The series was probably the most controversial in history, and probably the worst in terms of player behaviour ever. And that goes for both sides. Of course, the Australians were poor throughout the entire series, but what is often lost is that South Africans weren't exactly angels either. But this video isn't about that. The Australian team's fall from grace was spectacular to say the least. The culture of the team was poor, and many on the outside have pointed this out for some time. The shockwave to Australian cricket is still being felt long after the incident took place, and it will continue to have ripple effects on Australian cricket for many years to come.